Carter estate grounds, on the morning of Christmas Eve.
Before the rooster could cry, before the candles were lit for Christmas Eve prayers, the barn behind the Carter estate echoed with something far more chilling than carols. A scream, sharp, wet, ripped straight from a child's throat. The sky was still dark purple. That eerie hour just before sunrise where the world feels suspended, breathless. But the barn was awake, and it was bleeding. Inside, the scene looked like something torn from a fever dream. A young girl, no older than 14, thrashed in the dirt, her limbs flailing, her voice cracking beneath the weight of pain. Her nightgown, once white, with tiny blue flowers, was now smeared with mud, streaked with crimson. One of her arms bent the wrong way, her lips split like ripe fruit. The earth beneath her back was already soaking. Hovering above her was Eleanor Carter, barefoot, wild-eyed, her silk nightdress torn at the sleeve, sticking to her with sweat and fury. A lantern swayed from her left hand, casting wild shadows across the wooden walls. In her right hand, a belt. The metal buckle caught the flame and flashed like a blade. She didn't scream. She didn't shout. She struck. Once. Twice. Then again. The girl's body bucked. Her mouth opened but no sound came. Only blood. A whisper of footsteps stirred outside the barn. The sound of others watching, not daring to breathe too loud. The slave quarters sat just beyond the tree line, and from between the slats in the barn wall, a dozen dark eyes peered in. No one moved, no one called out, because they knew interrupting Miss Eleanor meant pain would only multiply. And so they watched. Even her husband, Thomas Carter, stood frozen by the kitchen door. A flask trembled in his hand. He'd seen Eleanor angry before, but not like this. Not this early. Not with that look in her eye, the kind that doesn't blink, the kind that doesn't return once it's gone too far. And inside the main house, polished and quiet, the preacher's robes were laid out on the guest bed. He'd be arriving at 7, to bless the household, to share the word. But how do you bless a house built on blood? Imagine you were there, standing in that cold barn, your bare toes curling in the dirt, the smell of sweat and iron thick in your nose. Could you have stepped forward? Could you have spoken up? Or would you too have stayed silent and watched? Eleanor let out a low breath, almost a sob. Her grip loosened on the belt. It slipped from her fingers and thudded against the wood. She stared down at the girl, limp now, eyes glassy, one arm twitching involuntarily. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. The only sound left was the soft sputter of the lantern and the girl's wet breathing, growing slower, shallower. Outside, the wind changed. The trees shifted. A crow screamed in the distance, sharp, sudden, like a warning. Eleanor turned toward the open barn door, her silhouette backlit by firelight. Blood stained the hem of her gown. Her lips trembled. She whispered something, a name, but no one heard, or at least no one dared admit they had. She stepped out into the darkness, leaving the girl behind, broken, twitching, barely alive. What drives a woman of southern grace to become a butcher before dawn? And why did no one, not even her husband, stop her? The answer wasn't just in that barn. It was buried deeper, in secrets, in whispers, and in the past no one dared speak of, not even on Christmas Eve. The sun finally rose, slow, golden, indifferent, casting a soft glow over the Carter plantation. If you stood at the edge of the porch, coffee in hand, you might have said it looked like peace. The fields were silent, the grass shimmered, with frost, and the Carter mansion, with its columns tall and proud, looked like something out of a painting. Inside, everything was polished, scented, poised for guests. Silverware clinked faintly on porcelain in the dining hall. Biscuits were, stacked high under linen towels. Butter melted gently on grits. And Eleanor Carter, hairpinned, dress pristine, sat sipping tea, as if her hands hadn't spilled blood just hours ago. The parlour smelled of oranges and cinnamon. A Christmas wreath hung on every door. The fire crackled cheerfully. You could almost forget that just beyond the garden fence lay a different world. Step outside, walk 50 yards behind the house, and everything changes. Dirt paths replace paved walkways. The scent of cinnamon fades, replaced by damp wood, rotting hay, unwashed bodies. No garlands, no music. Just flies, mud, silence. These were the slave quarters. Wooden shacks leaned against one another like tired men. The roofs sagged. Gaps in the walls let the cold creep in at night. One fire pit served 4 families. A single pot of thin cornmeal porridge boiled slowly, the steam rising into the grey sky. The air was different here, thicker, more honest, and inside one of those shacks, a mother pressed cloth to her daughter's wounds. It wasn't Dinah. Not yet. It was another girl. Just another day, another bruise, another body Eleanor had claimed as hers. Direct address. Can you picture it? 2 worlds on the same soil. One lined with velvet drapes, the other with broken ribs. One sipping spiced tea, the other whispering prayers over broken children. In the big house, Eleanor's staff polished the Christmas candelabras. A white dress hung in her bedroom. She planned to wear it for church tomorrow. Thomas, her husband, smoked by the piano, pretending to read the Charleston Gazette. He didn't look at her. In the quarters, Dinah sat alone. Her legs were scraped, her fingers trembling. She clutched something, a tiny wooden doll, tight against her chest. She hadn't slept. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't cried. But she'd seen. She had watched Eleanor kill that girl in the barn. And now, she waited. Historical glimpse. Across the American South, many slave owners projected holiday generosity in public, distributing gifts or increasing rations for appearances. But behind closed doors, punishments often escalated. Holidays gave owners excuses for control, beatings, and correcting behavior before the new year. The Carter household was no different. They threw grand parties. They prayed loudly in church. But behind the wreaths and garlands was rot. And in that rot, Dinah was learning to survive. Eleanor was not just feared, she was unpredictable. Sometimes she smiled when she punished. Sometimes she cried afterward, but never, not once, did she apologize. And now, something was off. She was quieter than usual. Her hands shook when she held her teacup. Her eyes darted to the barn window more than once. Something was haunting her, or maybe something was threatening her. Because somewhere on the plantation, a secret was moving. And Dinah? She wasn't just a child anymore. She was a witness. What secret had Eleanor buried beneath the weight of her silence? And what did Dinah know that could bring the whole house crashing down? The first time Dinah was called into the parlour, she thought it was a mistake. The parlour was Eleanor Carter's sanctuary, the one place on the estate where even her husband didn't sit without being summoned. Soft green wallpaper imported from France. A marble-topped table with a silver tea set polished daily. Books no one read. A piano no one touched. And lace curtains that filtered the light like heaven. Dinah entered barefoot, nervous, hands tucked behind her back. She didn't know where to look. At the floor, the ceiling, the silent portrait of Eleanor's grandmother on the wall. But Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She smiled. "Come closer," she said. Dinah obeyed. Eleanor poured tea into a tiny cup, then handed it to her. The warmth startled Dinah. No one ever offered her tea, not even the kitchen maid. Eleanor leaned forward. "I need your help," she said. In the 1850s, some plantation mistresses used enslaved children as informants, bribing them with scraps, favors, or hollow promises. It was a tactic of manipulation, disguised as kindness, and it worked, until it didn't. Eleanor tapped her fingernail on the porcelain cup. "There's something wrong in the quarters," she whispered. "People are hiding things, talking after, dark, planning." She paused. "You hear things, don't you?" Dinah didn't answer. She didn't have to. Eleanor smiled wider. "I'll give you better blankets," she said. "Fresh bread every morning. Maybe even some books, if you behave." And then came the real bait. "Do well for me, Dinah, and I'll take you to Charleston next spring." Charleston. The name hit like thunder. No child from the quarters had ever even seen the edge of that city. Not unless they were being sold. "Imagine it," Eleanor whispered, eyes bright. "A real bed, real clothes, no dirt, no rats, just you and me in the city." Dinah was only 14. But 14 on a plantation meant something different. It meant scars, silence, survival. She had learned early how to hide her thoughts, how to keep her face blank even when her heart screamed. She didn't trust Eleanor. She never would. But she nodded, and that was enough. That night, Eleanor sent her a white ribbon. The next day, she asked Dinah to tell her who was whispering in the quarters after sundown. Dinah lied. She named no one. But she started to listen, and she started to write. Inside her tiny wooden doll, hollowed out carefully with a rusted spoon, Dinah carved words, names, hints, whispers. EC touched her. He watched. L bled for 3 days. T was paid. All in letters, all in silence. She carved not to please Eleanor, but to remember, because Dinah had realized something far more powerful than escape. Secrets were currency, and Eleanor had plenty of them. Late one night, as frost crept under the door of her shack, Dinah whispered to Leah, her closest friend. "I think she's scared of something," Dinah said. "Of us?" Leah scoffed. "No," Dinah replied, tightening her grip on the doll. "Of what we know." The next morning, Leah didn't wake. Up, she was gone. No warning, no sound, her blanket neatly folded, her shoes still by the bed. Eleanor claimed she'd been sent to the river camp for misbehavior, but Dinah knew better. Leah had heard too much. Maybe said too much. What would you do? Keep quiet and live? Or speak and vanish like the others? Imagine carrying the truth in a wooden doll, knowing that the wrong person might kill for it. And so Dinah stopped smiling, stopped trusting. She spoke only when spoken to. She slept with the doll clutched to her chest and a sharpened nail hidden in her pillow. But she kept writing. She kept remembering. Because someday, someone would need to know the truth. And when that day came, she wanted the story to still exist, even if she didn't. But how long can a child walk the edge of a knife before someone pushes her off? Eleanor's smile was growing thinner by the day, and Dinah was starting to realize she hadn't been chosen. She'd been marked. The frost clung to the windows like breath. A brittle stillness had settled over the Carter estate, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, only suffocates. Something was off. It began with Eleanor's silence, not the controlled quiet she wore like lace in front of guests, but a different kind, a hollow sort of silence. She didn't give orders. She didn't correct the table settings. She didn't even hum. She watched. She sat for hours on the veranda, eyes fixed on the path, leading to the quarters. Her tea went cold. Her hair frizzed in the damp, but she didn't move, not even when Thomas asked if she was feeling well. That night, no carolers came to the door. The cook was told to cancel the pudding. Eleanor refused supper. The fire in the parlor burned too low. And somewhere in the quarters, a girl named Dinah woke up to find her doll missing. She searched everywhere, under her cot, behind the wash barrel, in the hollow tree trunk where she sometimes hid bread. Nothing. The doll was gone, and with it, Every name she'd carved, every secret she'd buried, every sliver of safety she had left. The world spun. She didn't scream. Screaming made you disappear. She just sat, hands shaking, staring into the darkness as if it would stare back with answers. She didn't know Eleanor had already found it. The doll, split at the seams, words carved in broken English, letters that painted a picture too dangerous to ignore. ECLT whispers. Blood. It was enough to shatter the silence, enough to confirm Eleanor's worst fear, that the thing she tried to erase was still alive, that somewhere in her perfect estate, someone knew, and Eleanor, who once held a girl's future like a toy between her fingers, now held fear. It didn't look like fear, though. It looked like stillness. She didn't scream. She didn't weep. She simply lit a lantern and walked barefoot into the barn. Imagine standing in that darkness, just before dawn. The kind of black that makes everything feel closer. You're not sure if the silence belongs to sleep or death. Your breath puffs white in the air. Your ears strain to catch the slightest sound, and then you hear it. The crunch of hay under footsteps, the click of a belt buckle, a long, slow inhale, and then the whisper, "Where's the doll?" Dinah never answered. She'd never been taught how to lie under torture. But she had learned how to be quiet. Outside, the trees didn't move. The wind didn't howl. Even the crows, loudmouth sentinels of the plantation, kept their distance. Something ancient had taken root that night, a promise, a reckoning. The air was thick with it. In the main house, the preacher laid out his sermon. He'd speak of rebirth and peace, of holy nights and forgiven sins. But the barn would be where blood fell on holy ground. And Eleanor, beneath her silken scripture, had become something else. No longer mistress, no longer woman, just violence in human form. She would not ask twice. She would not cry again. She would beat the truth out of Dinah, even if it meant killing the only person who could name what she'd done. And so the stage was set. The doll was gone. The blade had been sharpened, not with steel, but with fear, and the barn door creaked open. Dinah stepped inside, alone, because someone had to answer for what was written, even if the ink was carved in silence, even if it bled, even if it ended before Christmas morning. What would you do if your survival depended on knowing when not to speak? She could smell the blood before she saw it, and she knew, before the first blow landed, that she would not leave that barn the same, if she left it at all. The barn was cold, not just from the morning air, but from something deeper, something that clung to the rafters and soaked into the beams. The kind of cold that didn't come from outside. It came from fear. Dinah stood just inside the doorway, her bare feet pressed into hay-streaked dirt. Her breath came fast. Her fingers curled into fists, not to fight, but to keep from shaking. Eleanor was already there. She stood in the center of the barn, lantern in one hand, the other clenched, around something long, heavy, and familiar. The doll. Its wooden face cracked, the ribbon torn. The bottom had been pried open, its insides scraped bare. There were no guards, no house staff, no husband, just the two of them, mistress and slave, hunter and hunted, the woman who held the whip, and the girl who held her silence. "I trusted you," Eleanor said softly. Dinah didn't speak. Eleanor stepped forward. "You were in my parlor. I gave you tea. I gave you kindness. And this is how you repay me." Her voice cracked, but not from sorrow, from rage. She lifted the belt. The first strike landed across Dinah's shoulder. The sound echoed like a shot. Dinah stumbled back, biting her lip so hard it split. The second strike was worse. It curled around her ribs and dragged her to the floor. Her scream was short, sharp, The kind that didn't come from the throat, but from the gut. "You little spy," Eleanor hissed. "You thought you could write secrets." Another blow. "You thought no one would find them." Another. "You think I won't tear the truth out of you." Again. 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 Dinah's body twisted, curled in on itself like a broken doll. Her arms shielded her head. Her knees pulled to her chest, but there was no safe part left to protect. The blows kept coming. A belt, a broomstick, bare hands, whatever Eleanor could reach, whatever would leave a mark. Her fury had no rhythm, no pattern, just raw, unrelenting violence. And still, Dinah said nothing. Not about Leah. Not about the names. Not about the blood she'd seen behind closed doors. The barn filled with the sound of breath and skin and wood and screams. Outside, the trees stood still. The sky turned pale. Inside the house, the preacher arrived. He was offered coffee. He asked where Miss Eleanor was. No one answered. Thomas sat in the study, flask in hand, eyes fixed on the floor. He knew, they all knew, but no one moved. Because on this plantation, silence protected everyone, especially the ones holding the whip. Dinah's body finally stopped struggling. Her breath rattled in her throat. One eye was swollen shut. Her lip had split in 3 places. Blood dripped down her arm, soaking into the dirt below. Eleanor stood over her, chest heaving, eyes wild, hair falling from its pins. She didn't look like a mistress anymore. She looked like a woman unhinged. She looked like vengeance. She looked terrified. She dropped the belt. It hit the ground with a dull thud. Her fingers trembled. Her breath slowed. She looked down at what she'd done, at the broken, barely breathing child curled at her feet. For one brief moment, she wavered, as if something human clawed its way back to the surface. But it didn't last. She turned and walked out. No apology, no remorse, just footsteps fading into the cold. The barn fell silent again. Only Dinah remained, half-conscious, bleeding, staring at the broken doll lying just beyond reach. She reached for it once. Her fingers brushed the wood, and then everything went black. Imagine being 14 and waking up not knowing if the sun outside means life or death. Imagine feeling your heartbeat slow, not from age or sickness, but because someone decided your silence was too dangerous to exist. The preacher was already reading scripture in the parlor, and Dinah's blood still hadn't dried. But in the dirt beside her, just beneath the lantern's last flicker, the cracked doll rested quietly, with one word still carved deep in its base. Remember. The barn door creaked on its hinges as the wind finally moved. Inside, the blood had dried. The hay was stiff with it. The ground was darker where Dinah's body had laid, like the earth itself had tried to absorb her pain. But Dinah was gone. By the time the preacher finished his sermon in the parlor, she had been quietly removed. No questions, no announcement. Just 2 houseboys and a wheelbarrow before sunrise. No prayers, no last words. The preacher never knew. Or maybe he did. Maybe he chose not to ask why Eleanor's hands were still red when she lit the Christmas candle. The Carter estate hummed with polite holiday noise. A new wreath hung on the front door. The staff served mulled wine. Choir music floated through the drawing room like nothing had happened. And in a way, nothing had, because Dinah was a slave girl, and girls like her didn't get justice. They got replaced. By evening, another child had been brought in from the rice fields. Small, thin, quiet. Eleanor never looked her in the eyes. She didn't have to. She had made her point, but something had changed. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced the hallway at night, whispered to herself. Locked her doors even in daylight. Her reflection in the mirror looked thinner, older, hunted. She scribbled in notebooks and burned them by morning. One night, She wandered into the barn, barefoot again, holding a candle. She found a splinter of wood lodged in the dirt where Dinah had fallen. It was all that remained of the doll. She stared at it for a long time, then dropped it back into the hay and wept. Thomas left her the following spring, quietly, without farewell. He took the carriage to Charleston and never returned. No one ever asked why. No one ever dared, but the whispers began. The new girl in the kitchen swore she saw Eleanor talking to an empty chair. Another claimed she woke up screaming Dinah's name, and one housemaid, old enough to remember every crack in the floorboards, said she found muddy footprints in the barn for weeks after. Always barefoot, always small. The official story was simple. Dinah had run off, escaped in the night, vanished into the woods. But everyone knew. They just didn't say it. Because saying it would mean remembering it, would mean admitting it happened, would mean doing something. And in places like Carter Plantation, the silence was heavier than the truth. Across the South, countless deaths like Dinah's were never recorded. No ledgers, no graves, just names whispered once, then erased. The legacy of slave mistresses like Eleanor Carter, women painted as refined and virtuous in history books, often hides the cruelty they inflicted behind closed doors. Dinah was one of thousands, but she had carved her story, even if only in wood, even if only for a moment. And sometimes, a story is enough to survive the silence. Because a housemaid told her daughter, who told her grandson, who whispered it to a writer, who carved it into history not with a belt, but with truth. You won't find Dinah's name in textbooks. No portrait hangs for her in any gallery. But she lived, she bled, she remembered, and now you remember too. Stories like this must never be forgotten. If you want to uncover more untold truths, buried in the dirt and hidden behind polished doors, stay with us, because this is just one voice among thousands still waiting to be heard.